Hello, everyone, and welcome to the UNB Law Podcast. My name is Michael Marin, and I'm the Acting Dean of Law at UNB. We begin all of our events by recognizing and respectfully acknowledging that the UNB Law community gathers on the unsurrendered and unceded traditional lands of Wolastoqiyik. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Wade McLaughlin, a graduate of the class of 1981. Mr. McLaughlin's career is filled with outstanding achievements. At UNB Law, he was a Beaverbrook Scholar and was awarded the Lieutenant Governor's Medal upon graduation. He clerked at the Supreme Court of Canada for Justice Esty, earned an LLM at Yale Law School, and served as a law professor at Dalhousie for 8 years. He then came back to UNB Law and served as our dean from 1991 to 1996. And among his many accomplishments as dean is the establishment of the Heritage Fund, which continues to support our faculty to this day. In 1999, he became the president of the University of Prince Edward Island. During his time as president, UPEI witnessed very significant growth in enrollment, climbed in the national rankings, and more than doubled its research funding. After 12 years at the helm of UPEI, he was named president emeritus. Then he entered politics, becoming the 32nd premier of PEI in February 2015. Following the 2019 election, Mr. McLaughlin left politics and is now involved in a number of entrepreneurial ventures focused on promoting international collaboration in post-secondary education and enhancing the delivery of government services to new Canadians. Wade McLaughlin, thank you so much for being here. As I said earlier, this is the highlight of my week.
That's well. It's great to be here with you, Dean Marin. And we probably should make some ground rules about when in the conversation we'll switch to Mike and Wade.
Well, you can call me Mike. You shouldn't call me anything other than by my first name. And how would you like me to?
You can call me Wade. We've made the introductions. Thanks.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, as I said, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. And one of the reasons why we're doing this is because we want to build community at a time when people are isolated, and we want people to feel proud of their connection to UNB Law. And as I already described, you have a remarkable story and a lot of wisdom to share. And I look forward to exploring a number of topics with you today. Shall we start with your life before law school? You were born in Stanhope, which is a beautiful part of PEI. I vacationed there this summer, and that's actually where we met. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and where you're from?
Sure, Mike. And I live not far from Stanhope now in the neighboring community of West Beaufort. My family was in Stanhope from the early 1800s. And one way of giving a sense of both the time and I'll say scale, when I was growing up, when I started in grade 1 at the local Stanhope school, that was the first year. It was a 2-room school, having for the previous century and more being the 1 room. And it was 2 rooms with 10 grades, which is a different affair from what most grade 1 encounter these days. And in terms of the familial surround of the students in those 2 rooms, 18 of us were first cousins. So, and my grandmother lived in the same community with us, and she had 57 grandchildren. So this was, among other things, the baby boom. And it does give us a way of understanding what that place was. It was within a 25-minute drive of Charlottetown, and we had a good life. A different way of understanding Stanhope and what you experienced this summer is it was a place, and still is, attract a lot of summer visitors, and that gave us as youngsters a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurship with any number of businesses. Probably made more money in some of those weeks than I have since, and it gave us a chance to meet a lot of new people. So you pair that tight familial context with a lot of new friends and people coming and going during the summer, and it was a great place to grow up.
Can I ask you, did you have a business? Did you have your own summer
We,
business?
we did everything. We sold the morning and afternoon newspaper, and they were pretty close to identical. So that was an early lesson in hustling to try and sell that afternoon thing people you had sold in the morning. And we had pony rides, a fair-sized enterprise. We would dig clams, we dig worms, gather bottles, anything that was an available resource. We were doing something with it.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, they say it was my first time there this summer, and it was absolutely beautiful. I think, as I told you, you live in paradise. It's absolutely stunning, and my family and I, are counting on returning very soon. Can I ask you, Wayne, what did you do before law school? Where did you study, and what did you choose to study?
So I went from that two-room school to a probably the biggest rural consolidated school in Prince Edward Island. So things were changing so quickly during that period. And I went to the University of Prince Edward Island, where I did my Bachelor of Business Administration with a lot of uh, electives and study across the board from that time. And not insignificantly, I took 2 years between my UPEI graduation and arriving at UNB Law, when I pretty well traveled the world, including, I'd be surprised if there weren't 25 or 30,000 kilometers of hitchhiking. I worked the oil rigs in Western Alberta at the time. My first job at UPEI was working on a road construction site in northern Quebec. I wanted to learn to speak French, and I got away at Singapore and spent a lot of time in Europe, all through the States. Other things one wouldn't do today. If this were 6 months ago, I would have been saying that I traveled in places like Afghanistan and Iran and Sri Lanka and Pakistan and Egypt, where I couldn't go today. But now I can add any place in the United States where I wouldn't be going today.
Right, right. And do you think that experience prepared you for law school? Like, was that sort of, is that when you decided that law school was something you wanted to do, or had you been contemplating it beforehand?
I wrote the LSAT tests when I was completing my fourth year of undergrad studies, and in fact, I wrote one of those grade 3 papers. What you want to be when you grow up. Quite remarkably, it said I wanted to be a lawyer or a politician. Anyway, I did a lot of wandering around in the meantime, as you know. But back to the core of your question, absolutely. Those two gap years allowed me to arrive with more, I'll say, serenity at in those first weeks of law school, and that you could see that, and you could see it with others in our class. And I'm not everybody got along great and did well, but there was a certain benefit or balance, I think, that came from, and world, I might say, mindedness that came from having had those two gap years.
It's interesting because we see the same pattern now. We have exceptional students that start at sort of different stages, but many of our students who do have the benefit of a few years removed from their undergraduate, who've worked, uh, gained a little bit of life experience. I think I don't know if you would agree with this, but they discover themselves a little bit more, and their strengths and weaknesses. They gain some confidence, and I think that's helpful when you're taking on a big challenge like law school. You have a little bit of perspective, and I find that's helpful. I'm not sure why we're all sort of there seems to be a tendency that young people are really in a hurry to get things done, but sometimes taking a break a little bit can be beneficial.
And I would add to that, Mike, that taking that kind of gap year where you can sort of be resourceful and do see a lot of the world on a tight budget
Yeah,
is the kind of thing you can do at 21 that is not that chance is not going to come back later in life.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So then, why did you decide to go to UNB Law? I mean, you were a Beaverbrook scholar, so you had a stellar academic record. You obviously did really well on the LSAT. You could have gone anywhere, I bet. How come you chose UNB Law?
Well, it's funny to look back on it, but there's a very clear answer to that. I was essentially thinking about Dalhousie or UNB at that stage. I probably could have gone elsewhere. And the very precise reason why I chose UNB is that I thought there would be fewer distractions in Fredericton than in the big city of Halifax.
Okay.
So it turned out to be turned out to be a correct assessment. And I also had some quite close friends who were the years ahead of me at UNB.
Interesting. And do you remember your first day of law school? Do you remember what was going through your mind? Because some of our students, our first year students, just started a few weeks ago, and I bet they were really nervous. And so they're probably curious, what does someone 40 years removed remember about their first day of law school?
And I do remember, and it was really, I might say, my main sentiment was uncertainty, undoubtedly underlined or accentuated by the fact that in those days, if you had the Beaverbrook Scholarship, you had to be in the top 10 in the class to hang on to it for the second year and the third. And there's so much, say, hype. There's so much said about uh, uh, studying law. I think that crazy show with what's his name, the big actor. I'll think of it, but it was set at Harvard. It had been out about that time, so there was lots of anticipation. Most of it
Or
anxiety.
are you talking about the Paper Chase, the
Yes,
film?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Absolutely. That's a
yeah,
classic. I try to
yeah.
get I never know whether to recommend that to our students or not because it's quite terrifying.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I had seen it. It was around, and so I don't want to make it sound like I was filled with anxiety, but I was filled with uncertainty, and I was uh, in that first on that first day, and probably for the first week or so, um, going into this, being prepared to flunk out in the first semester, really not knowing how I would do. So that was very much, as I say, I wasn't worried about it. I was certainly not arriving there thinking, that that I was going to master everything.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were coming in, sort of motivated and taking it seriously. And so it worked out well. I mean, you graduated in 81, you won the Lieutenant Governor's Medal. So maybe there was no reason to be nervous. It all worked out. But can you tell us a little bit about what UNB Law was like back then? What were those 3 years like for you? What kind of place was it?
We made really good friends, more than friends, formed bonds with classmates that endured today. We had great and quite kind of accessible relationships with our profs. There were 80 students, two classes of 40. Uh, and during the first year, that group of 40 took all of our classes together. So it was, in terms of scale, um, the kind of thing that you could easily get your arms around. And, and we were really, in a sense, away from the rest of the camp, not away from physically, but our program was separate from the rest of the campus. And we really just built our own kind of culture and fun. And The law school itself was slightly smaller than it is now because of the expansion of what was mainly the library, and then with some additional classrooms on the ground floor, took place after I was there. And um, the main way that we found some expanded space was at a pub called the Riverview Arms, which
Okay.
was just downriver from the Princess Margaret Bridge, uh, and a place that was sort of second choice called the River Room, which was a part of the Beaverbrook Hotel, uh, as it was then known.
I thought you went to UNB Law because you didn't want any distractions, and you are
That,
partying.
so both the anxiety about whether I would flunk out and the kind of aversion to distractions pretty well went away by about the second week.
Okay, okay, okay. Well, that's good. So it sounds like you had really close bonds with your classmates, and that's something we hear that's I guess special about UNB Law still. And we're a little bit bigger now enrollment wise, but not much. And we still have two sections, and that's something that our students talk about and remember is the closeness of the student community. Um, do you remember a particularly funny story or incident that happened during your time at UNB Law? Students often recollect these things and remember them many years on. Anything stand out in your mind that happened during law school?
Of course, there is a multitude of funny recollections, so I won't take you through all of them. Um, I'll try a couple. One of our upper classmates had a dog he had trained the dog to sing, and that dog Blue was the dog's name, was a regular attender at the happy hours, which were a weekly event in the faculty lounge, in that lower room. I think it's still called maybe the student lounge.
Student lounge, that's right.
And two other quick ones. This next one brings some of the sense that while we were small and mainly, I'll say maritime, but it was Atlantic with a nice number from across the country. And one of our first year, we studied constitutional law. And it was, I believe, Anne McClellan's third year teaching. And she was a great teacher and energetic and barely much older than we were. And we were studying a case on interprovincial powers, the federal power over interprovincial transportation. And there was a case, and then still, people still pay attention to it, including deciding what they'll do with the carbon tax, called Winner versus SMT, and had something to do with the circumstances of this that brought this to a prosecution. Involved a bus crossing the border from St. Stephen, New Brunswick, to Maine, and Anne referred to the town on the Maine side of the border as Calais, which you would, of course, if you were in France. And my classmates from Charlotte County and St. John in particular just couldn't keep themselves from cracking up over anyone who was kind of naive enough to not know it was callous. So it's one of those small things that stands out. But let me conclude on this one, which was equally hilarious and has stuck with me within a few weeks of completing our third year. And one of my great friends and still a great friend to this day, Newfoundlander, Linda Rose, and she had missed quite a bit of time with the health things or whatever it was in that last semester. And top it all off, I forget the circumstances, she broke her ankle with about a week to go before we were to write those final exams. And, I went to see Linda to offer some help or at least some condolences. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, my love. It's all introductory." This, this was after 3 years of law school with a week to go. She had a pretty good perspective on it.
That's great. Well, that sounds fantastic. So we have a singing dog, we have some culture shock, and maybe we have an overconfident classmate.
She turned out just fine.
So, well, that's great. No, those are some good stories. Um, it's one of the things I ask, and I don't mean to be negative about it, but this is kind of one of the feelings I have. Like I often think about what I would do differently about my law school experience. And what you were describing about how you felt when you started, I could kind of relate to because I also did 2 years before law school. I worked and I studied and in another field. And I felt like, I really had to do well. Like I was very focused on the outcome and the grades because I had to justify this choice. I could have, continued studying or gone to work, but I chose to do this thing that takes 3 years and is very expensive, and I was uncertain about it. So I was very focused on the outcome, and I really didn't take the opportunity to have the types of experiences that you did. I was studying all the time. I was very boring. I didn't have that many friends, didn't socialize as much. Of course, I didn't go to UNB Law. I went to another law school, which doesn't sort of have the same sort of culture as we do. Is there anything? So, if I were to do it over again, I would focus more on the experience and the outcome. I would try to enjoy it as much as I can, and that even goes for the learning process. Like I was very focused on grades as opposed to engaging with the material. And I only really started engaging with material after my future was secure with the job and stuff like that. So if I were to do it over again, this is the advice I give students. I would really focus on the process and not the outcome and enjoy the experience because you never get to do it again. Is there anything that you would do differently about your law school experience?
There are a few things I would do, Mike, but it would probably mean having more than 24 hours a day. But let me mention a couple that I would, in retrospect, try to work in. One would be to take more advantage of what was taking place in the rest of UNB Fredericton campus. Lots of things going on outside of the law school. A second um, would likely be, and this would require doing less reading in law. I would likely spend more time reading uh, outside of the law, and that of course is uh, requires more time. And one thing I did, and I'm so happy about it looking back, is I spent, sounds so old fashioned to say this now, I spent hours that would total several months, I expect, of my time, my 3 years at law school, wandering the stacks. So I would give myself some little puzzle or something that I didn't really understand very well. And of course, this was a whole decade before there was any practical internet available. And that law library, of course, was smaller than it is now. And I just wander around and work through the indexes, look at lines of books, and pull things off the shelf. And it was a truly curiosity driven, I might say, exercise. and I loved doing that, and I undoubtedly learned things that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you made the most of your law school experience, and then if I'm not mistaken, right after that, you started your clerkship at the Supreme Court with Justice Esty, and that's a job that a lot of law students and lawyers are curious about. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience? The clerkship has changed a fair bit since that time in a number of ways that we can talk about. What was it like back then, and what do you remember about that experience?
Well, I have to say, I probably arrived um, to start that clerkship some of the same uncertainty that I described of in approaching my first day or week at law school, because you really uh, can't arrive there with any firm sense of how you're going to perform or what the expectations are or whether you'll measure up. And Justice Esty was a great, funny, witty. He was famous across for for being witty, but he was also famous for having cast a few law students on the bone heap. And I'm not saying clerk, although there were some clerks who were pretty nervous around him too. But in particular, back in the day when he had article students. In any event, um, so I arrived there, and in those days, Mike, each judge had one clerk.
Yeah,
And I think it was the 2 years after that they moved up to two. Uh, so it seemed like there was lots to do. Uh, and we really, we had a great time, really, with the intimacy of working directly
yeah,
for one judge. And in addition, he had a secretary, and that was it. The three of us. Um, and we were up and down the stairs, and had, we would go in the winter. Maybe every second Friday, we'd clear off and go skiing over at Mont Saint Marie. And he was one of these. Talk about curious. He was teaching himself that year at the age of closing in on 70, or certainly well into his 60s. He was teaching himself to ski on the downhill ski. No, on the uphill ski. He had read something about this and thought he'd better try that. In any event, the very first task I was given, uh, I arrived in still unloading furniture, was draft of the patriation reference. It was handed down to not 3 weeks, but within less than 3 weeks after I arrived in Ottawa. So those were interesting days. That's the biggest
wow,
thing the Supreme Court of Canada has ever decided. And I still remember that it gives you a sense of how funny Esty was, as long as things were going well. He when I went there to move some furniture into the place I rented, he asked me to drop in. He said, "Why don't you take this draft like back to the Maritimes with you, and you can kind of spend some time reading it to come back?" And I said, "Do you think that's a good idea for me to be kind of heading off with this?" And he laughed. He said he had been in the army uh, during the Second World War, and he said, I left a set of instructions in the Saskatoon railway station during the war, but no one knew what they were. Anyway, he said it'll be here under the Canadian Tire catalog. No one will think to look there. And we had a good time. And during that year, of course, there were 10 clerks. and we had a happy band. And, there were a couple of changes in the on the bench this year. That was the year when Bertha Wilson arrived, the first woman to serve on the court. So we had a really close and happy time, and we got a lot of work done too.
Wow. I mean, that just reminds me a little bit of my own clerkship experience. And you mentioned intimacy and the intimacy of that working relationship. I kind of feel the same way, although in my case, there were three clerks. And so it went from one to two to three and now four, believe it or not, there are four clerks now. So when you got the Supreme Court clerkship, that was the real hard job to get because there was only one for each judge. But you're right. The sense that I got was, the judges are kind of limited in terms of what they can do to socialize, right? And so their chambers is sort of like their community, their family, their work family. So we felt that way. Justice Binney made us feel that way. And one of the things that we used to do, you mentioned Justice Esty liked skiing. Justice Binney found out that my colleagues and I liked eating sushi, and we would go to a particular sushi restaurant in Ottawa, and we would come back and we would talk about how many pieces of sushi we had consumed because it was all you can eat. And I'm pretty proud of how much sushi I can eat. Um, and so he said, he likes a challenge. He's a pretty competitive guy. So he's like, I'll come with you. I'll show you how much sushi I can eat. So, we went out and we did some serious damage together. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things I think that it makes that job and any clerkship at any court really special because you're kind of in this circumstance for a year and you're together and you have to kind of make your own fun. It's and get along and you learn to get along and work productively together. So it's a really special experience.
And Mike, another high point of the year that I was there, 1981-82, was following on the court's decision, the patriation reference. The federal government and the provinces achieved an consensus to patriate the Constitution and introduce the Canadian Certificate of Freedom. And I was on the Hill, on Parliament Hill, in the pouring rain on April, I think, 17th of 1982. And the Queen was there to sign the papers. And
Wow, that's remarkable. So you literally witnessed history.
well, I'm sure everyone has, in other ways, but that was in legal terms, that was
Very significant.
a big watershed.
Absolutely. I want to talk to you a little bit about what you did after clerking. So you decided to go into academia and become a law professor. Um, how come and why did you decide to do that?
I think it was an extension of what I called wandering the stacks, some curiosity. Yeah, I enjoyed the puzzles. I enjoyed the work, and and I went to Yale, and indeed that was my experience. It wasn't. I would say it probably didn't have as much uncertainty uh, as my case at UNB did, because by that time I had a pretty good sense of what it was I wanted to work on and what I would say was suited for, and the intellectual challenge, the opportunity to read and write, the um, pursuit of uh, responses to whatever the puzzles were, which continues. So those were all available, or those were the next steps on the path. And it was certainly uh, an education for me to spend that year at Yale and with my peers. In fact, I ended up spending more time and forming more friendships with the JD students, just because they came from all parts of the United States, and um, that was an experience in itself. And I would say that the United States in those days was a much different country than it is today in terms of political climate or well, of course, we now have lots of partisanship and social media and so on. That was not part of, in the least, of the experience at Yale. I might say in between my second and third year um, at UNB in that summer, I made a cross country trek, and I had decided that Vancouver was the place I wanted to kind of settle down or follow the practice of law. And I did some interviews and accepted a job offer, and I had decided while I was living at the age of 19 bus tours across the country, Vancouver was the place. I don't think I could make that case. Never followed through on it. But when I went to Yale, when I went first to the clerkship, deferred on that articling position. I did again when I went to Yale. When I came to UNB as dean, the lawyers, one of the leading lawyers in BC, in the country, George McIntyre, wrote me a note and said, I'm still following your career, and I've still got that articling position.
Well, you must have made quite an impression, and I wonder what kind of impression you made on your colleagues when you arrived at UNB Law as dean, because you were only 36 years old. I hope you don't mind me pointing that out, which is just 10 years after or so after you graduated from law school. And some of your former professors, I'm sure, were still around, and now you come back and you're their leader. What was that like for you?
It I actually would have been the youngest person on faculty at that particular time. It happened to coincide with the celebration of the law school's centenary in 1991-92. So there was a lot of initiative, and a lot of planning had gone into this, but there was a lot of initiative that required uh, the who I might say didn't mind hustling, and an opportunity to work directly with colleagues and with graduates and the surrounding professional community, and indeed graduates of UN over several generations during that year. So it we were pretty busy, and there wasn't much time to think about, our whatever age we were, or some of the usual things that you might be more preoccupied with in the normal course of affairs. And we had a very successful centennial year production of a law school putting together of the Law School Heritage Fund, which that was the first time.
Absolutely. And that's a remarkable legacy, because I have to tell you that it still funds initiatives to this day at the law school. And, in a time when there's a lot of uncertainty around government funding and periods of austerity, it's those kinds of things that help maintain a program's quality, that you can, in spite of cuts, you still have these resources to focus on initiatives that help maintain the competitiveness of the faculty. So it really is a remarkable accomplishment.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Mike. And in fact, I think directly behind you is probably some of the evidence of what was achieved with the Heritage Fund in that rare book room. It's not the kind of thing that you do with tuition money.
Exactly. Yeah, and the expansion of the library as well, as I understand it. Um, no, it's and as you know, I mean, we're trying to do, or we're about to embark on something similar here in a bit, which we'll talk about. But the other thing that you're well known for as Dean of UNB Law is coining the slogan "Canada's Great Small Law School," and you know, the degree to which we use that has sort of ebbed and flowed over the years, but that sentiment is still sort of part of our identity, a core part of our identity. We feel like our advantage and our strength is being, a small law school that has sort of national reach and stature. And it's the smallness of the program that allows us to provide the mentorship and the opportunities that then allows our students to achieve big dreams, so small size, big dreams. Is that kind of what it meant to you? I'm just wondering where that idea came from and what it means to you.
I believe there were two aspects to it, or two faces to it. My first, um, calling it the Great Small Law School, spoke to who the students and faculty and main players in the law school itself would identify, how to what they would identify as their experience or their attachment to UNB law. And the other face of it, and it was important to do this, was to, um, I might say, defy gravity and make sure that we were recognized and appreciated nationally for the strength and the particular uh, character of UNB Law School. And I'm proud to say that both worked. The As you know, by not UNB Law in those kind of graduate satisfaction ratings was I think number 2 in the country.
Yeah.
And you don't want to quick run to the bank with some of the social science behind those surveys, but nonetheless, um, this was a measure of what the graduate said about UNB law compared with other law schools, and that together with some of the important work and research and the moot courts and various ways that there were at the time uh, for everyone involved with the law school to kind of put their best foot forward, helped to advance uh, the reputation regionally and nationally in a way that became quite palpable.
It's interesting because listening to you speaking about that, I'm seeing some parallels between the time that you were dean and where we are now. And we had an opportunity earlier this year to talk about UNB Law's strategic plan and kind of where we are now in our development. So we're at a point where we are trying to sort of regain that stature and make the investments and the changes that we need to make to become nationally competitive and sort of reach the top of Canadian legal education. Do you have any advice for us or suggestions about, as we embark on this journey, things that we should focus on?
Right. The first thing on that list, of course, is excellence. Law is a field where you can measure um, how how well people do, and that's from what takes place in the classroom, productivity and collaboration of faculty members to the work together with alumni and other elements of a supportive community for UNB Law. So the pieces are all there, and as you said, the pieces are there in the same way that they were in the early 1990s. Uh, I Let me have two pieces of advice in the spirit uh, uh, that you ask. One, um, don't be afraid to ask people to help. Um, I say, and I've said in other contexts, if you don't combine them water, you're not going to get a bite. So there's a big community out there over the years, and people people don't mind helping, especially if it's a place and an institution and part of their life where they have a strong sense of attachment. The second thing I would say is um, it might be easier than you think. That's to say, uh, no, it's like the Chinese adage: the first the first piece of the longest of a long journey is the first step. Where in Africa, there are a lot of different cultures where they say paths are made by walking. And I think that is a really important way to think about where UNB law is today and what would be involved in making the kind of progress or following or beating the path that you're talking about.
That's really, really interesting. So we just sort of have to get started and ask people for help and not worry so much about it. We'll get there. It sounds well. That's really reassuring. I want to switch gears here and talk about your life in politics and sort of leadership. Now, but let's focus on UPI a little bit because you became president of UPI shortly after leaving the deanship at UNB Law, and I heard from another former politician that being president of the university is the toughest and most political job there is. I'm wondering if that's true, if you agree with that.
There are similarities in one very important way, and that is in any role in whatever job it is we're doing, if it's leadership or in public or private life, our greatest enemy is likely that. And certainly in elected office, or that's to say, in leading a government, the number one way you miss what is always a small window of opportunity is if time gets away on you. And in our particular case, during the 4+ years I was premier, we had a very clear idea of what we wanted to do and what needed to be done. And in the two most important ways, one was population and demographics, and one was a sustainable structure for the economy. And we got lots of other done as well in terms of legislation and policies and resources and infrastructure, as you mentioned in the intro. But the two big things that have challenged our maritime and our Atlantic provinces to do so in an even more compelling or urgent way are an aging population and economies that don't produce enough wealth to keep even our own talented people in good paying jobs. So we were just focused, you might say, like a laser on that. And I'm proud to say that while we didn't get reelected, we, for Prince Edward Island, for a 5-year period, led all of the provinces for the growth in its economy, for the growth in its population, and for its immigration per capita. So as you mentioned in the intro, we managed to pay down some debt and reduce our debt ratio. Um, so that's it. You go into these things knowing that there's only so much you can do. There are certain things that will make a long-term difference, and you make sure that you don't waste any time.
It's interesting because so you talked about economic growth and the demographic challenge, um, and this has been a real problem for other provinces. And you often hear politicians and commentators say, "Oh well, there's very little that government can do. There's very little that you can do with public policy." But your time as premier and your government's record seems to suggest the opposite. So how does the government, like, what specific initiatives do you attribute that success to when other people are saying, "Oh, there's not much we can do and it's out of our hands"? I mean, you seem to your record seems to point in a different direction. So what do you attribute that success to specifically?
Immigration would have to be on that list, Mike. New people with greater background or experience and talent. So, and that's not taking away anything from the people like myself who've been around for 7 or 8 generations. But you can't get growth without talent, and that is directly tied to the economic story, because you need to have opportunities for people to work. They're not going to stay around long. I'm not talking strictly of newcomers, but our own graduates from our universities. So in a 4-year period, uh, we increased the number of full-time jobs by almost 15%, 8,500 full-time jobs, which is a lot in a little place like PEI, and in sectors that were and on this you don't just open, turn on the light and say, let's do this. This was building on a few generations of having invested in and good leadership in and good companies and good work and a good workforce in bioscience, in aerospace, in marine technologies, and in areas where we've been active for a few centuries, like food. And you can never forget the the role, because sometimes I think we tend to be too, say, prescriptive or particular in identifying what's new in any economy. It's true here in the Maritimes, just as it is across Canada. Close to 70% of the jobs and activity are in the service sector, and that includes culture, hospitality, tourism, and it all has to grow together. And we were, I'll say, fortunate, but the main thing a government can do is celebrate success.
I was going to ask you about that because the whole economic development and demographic challenge has a little bit of a chicken and egg problem to it because, if you don't have the opportunities and the jobs, people don't want to come. And so you have to build that foundation, as you said, and then maybe people will come. But it's hard to invest in those opportunities when you don't have the resources, and you need the immigration to drive the resources. So there's the chicken and egg problem. It sounds to me, as I'm listening to you, that you may have sort of focused on areas of strength and promoted them. Was that one of your strategies?
It was, and indeed, previous governments had built toward that. And in fact, I had a pretty direct hand in building some of those pathways or foundations during the time I served as UPEI president, notably in putting in place the critical ingredient for a successful bioscience sector, which today would be responsible for a lot of very good jobs and a significant, percentage of the growth in the PEI economy. And so Mike, the part that I think is so important in thinking about this and thinking about an economy or about a community and a population is, and I think governments can get too focused on the new and shiny or what's going to ride in over the hill and save us, when it's probably more or just as much about uh, providing opportunities for our own mobile and talented people to stay,
Right.
as it is to uh, bring in, the next wave of population. The one thing that governments that I would say for our government is we always would get up every morning with a clear acceptance, but a strong belief that there's no substitute for growth. And I do think that we kind of waxed and wane on that and have over time in here in the Atlantic region. But we have to believe we can excel. We have to believe that we can make things that we will sell to the world that they'll want because of competitive excellence. And then we have to hustle to make it so. And actually getting people to come from all over the world to be part of that is not, it's not that difficult. People will come to be part of success. And here's the piece that I'm looking forward to, and this has been known the world over. About 6 years, and it's almost exactly 6 years after newcomers arrive, there's another wave of innovation because they form networks, they develop ideas, they become comfortable in their family and their community and so on, and they're doing things that we wouldn't have thought of otherwise. The final thing that and is we sometimes talk about Atlantic Canada as if we're the only ones who are challenged by this. The problem or the reality of aging demographic is the fate of the Western world.
Yeah. Right.
Rates have slowed. People have just there are more people to get older than there are to starting out. Now and this is what I'm proudest of all the things we might talk about. We actually lowered the median age in Prince Edward Island quite consistently and dramatically in the space of 4 years. That's just yet, but once it starts, this is a great thing, and it's the same thing about what you're doing at US law school. Once you get started, the second step, the third become easier.
It snowballs. That's really interesting. You mentioned Atlantic Canada more broadly, and I'm wondering if you see opportunities or lessons for the rest of Atlantic Canada that can be learned from your experience in PEI and your record in PEI. Like, are there opportunities that you think are being overlooked in the other provinces, maybe?
Well, there's more being done today in certainly in the three maritime provinces than was the case 10 years ago or even 5 about immigration, and the federal government has been a willing and an active partner in developing and then acting on in immigration programs that are leading more adult than was the case a very short while ago. And this is already showing up in benefits in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. As so immigration, yeah, absolutely. The second, uh, and we were very close to having this done while I was in government, and we worked hard on it. Is to look for opportunity to improve our infrastructure, and generally that involves collaboration among the provinces and a partnership with the federal government. And recently, when the throne speech, there was a commitment to a significant federal investment in the electricity transmission infrastructure between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Right there. That will in turn benefit all of our region, including by giving us a greater ability to move renewable power around. And you're talking of an investment far off $500 million. So it takes a clear effort, a collaborative effort, and I'm really proud to see that commitment is made. And over time, it will be to the benefit of our region environmentally, economically, and of the further benefit that comes from working together.
It's interesting because you mentioned the role of social media, the polarization of politics, and I remember watching you on election night in 2019, which is obviously a disappointing night for you. But at one point, they kind of caught you in your sort of campaign headquarters, and you gave sort of a very eloquent, very honorable kind of concession. And then they went back to the studio, and the journalists were commenting, about just that, about, that you're an honorable politician, that you have integrity, very civil. And in fact, it seems that the political culture in PEI is quite civil. Or at least that's how it was being portrayed publicly. I'm not sure what happens in the back rooms, but I feel like the world needs more PEI. It needs more of that civility. That even on a difficult night for you, you're still, speaking respectfully and optimistically about the future of the province. And, could you talk a little bit more about that civility and how we get back there? Because a lot of people think that that's, one of the big things that's missing in public life these days.
By the way, that broadcast that you've mentioned was taking place in the two-room school where I started out in grade one.
Wow. Wow.
And in many ways, closing that loop or making that connection is likely a part of the response to what you're bringing up here. I do think that people, and I'm talking about people who are 5-year-olds, need communities and families and a culture where they feel valued, where they are engaging with others, where they're not spending more time than they should looking at screens as opposed to, running in the woods or, whatever they've got a chance to do. And to me, there is a close connection between community and family life, and then what we expect in the public domain. When I was while I was at UNB as dean, I was part of, and I'm not saying that I was a principal player, but I was invited to be a director of the founding group of the Muriel Green Foundation for family violence prevention. And to me, these things are all connected. The a lot of the rough work, a lot of the violence, I might say, that we see today in politics is really, it comes from the same place, and it worries me. And to stay in a better place or to get back to a better place, for starters, I think people, I mean, I'm talking collectively, need to spend kind of more time listening, need to spend more time kind of biting our tongue. I can tell you I did a lot of that when during the time I was in politics. But days now when I wonder why I didn't kind of push back more. And this is this may not sound like a very original thing to say, but there is kind of basic grace that, you know, I hope many of us learned from our grandmothers, that should play a greater role in our public affairs than it currently does.
Right. Oh, that's a lot of us hope that, for sure. And as I say, watching your political career, I think you set an excellent example of that. And the other thing that I'm curious about, because this is one of the few times I've ever had a chance to speak to a premier, so this is a real treat for me, and I'm sure for our audience. And one of the things that often leaders struggle with is sort of keeping everyone paddling in the same direction. And as premier, you have your cabinet, and all the members of your cabinet have their own portfolios, but they also have their own constituents, and they themselves have to be reelected. And you're the leader, obviously, and you have a mandate. There are different views. How do you keep all of that together? Because that's notoriously a big challenge for premiers, and I'm just curious how you deal with that. How do you keep the team going? What's the secret to doing that?
Well, I'm not sure if I've mastered that. To tell you the truth, we were a third term government, you might say, with two majorities by Robert Hughes and his team, my predecessor. So you're always trying to get as much done as you can in a context that is largely depicted or interpreted by the media as a horse race. And anything that happens with your team that deviates from almost total adhesion makes news, and usually in a frivolous way, because it should be healthy to have the kind of active debate and open dialogue that you might say we're more used to, or in the old days we were used to in the university. So you have to try to, and we had issues. We went, in the case of the island, from 38 years having no abortion access to having what is now considered to be the most fulsome array of choices right across the spectrum reproductive health of any province in Canada. And I might say the Charter of Rights was handy to, make the change. The but it you you also have to sometimes just say something and move on. So in that case, I said, how are we going to grow the population if we don't have reproductive health? So I'm not sure that persuaded a whole lot of people, but at least it sounded like a sentence with a good question mark or three at the end of it. So I'm not going to sit here and say I know exactly, how everything. The response has been to centralize control of the premier or prime minister's office and through various, usually unelected people account. Um, One of my dear friends, Donald Savoy, has written several very good books about this, and in a way that's quite critical of what he calls government from the center. There's another very good book that is just hitting the shelves this week or this by a good political scientist at Memorial University, Alex Marland, who did a lot of background research and has written a book called Whipped about party discipline in Canada that I think a lot of people will find insightful. So this is a long answer. I'm sort of back to wandering the stacks and hope that there'll be something there that will give me an answer.
Well, it's a tough question, right? And because it's an enduring challenge, and it's the sort of the challenge of our political system, and it's probably good that our political system challenges leaders in that way, because that's how we ensure sort of accountability and diversity of views and representation, and but it's something that always struck me about our political system, that the person in the premier's chair has a really tough job, because keeping this caucus and this cabinet together and moving an agenda forward is anyways it strikes me as quite daunting. And the other thing that strikes me as very daunting about your former job is that you're often having to make policy in the midst of uncertainty. So you don't have all the right information. You don't have a crystal ball. You don't know how things are going to work out. And what's interesting is that all of us now, whether you're a leader in a small business or the premier of a province, we're all having to do that because of the pandemic. So I'm wondering, if you have any advice in that regard for leaders. Like how do you make decisions when you don't know what's really around the corner?
Well, Mike, I think the biggest answer I have for that, and it was true throughout our time government, and in most other endeavors I've been involved with, is to get the best evidence possible. And that may sound glib, but it's huge, especially significant in a context where we're talking about our education at UNB Law and what lawyers do in society. Anything that we can do that is better informed or that is done more because there's light as opposed to heat will be a better decision. And on your point about the pandemic, which is totally well taken, I try to follow this kind of every day. Back in March, there was a lot of guesswork. And while we still, while we sit here now that we're going to go through the second wave, it's amazing how much our healthcare professionals have learned, and how much sacrifice and dedication they've that they've kind of directed toward this, um, about ventilators, for example. We're not quite there, but we'll know more about vaccines by this time next year, I don't think. And the thing that I'm really proud of, to link your point about leadership and how you do things, is that in the main in Canada, um, our governments and businesses have taken the lead and the advice from the public health experts and the epidemiologists. And there's no question in my mind we're in a better place because of that.
Right. Right. And, so it's interesting. It sounds like um, your advice is, you got to not be afraid to make decisions with the information that you have, the best information, seek it out. But at some point you got to make a decision, and that will be the best informed decision you can. It won't be perfectly informed, but it'll be as well informed as it could be. And that's probably the best you can do in the circumstances.
And I'm so glad that we got through to this point in the conversation. I read an excellent piece of work from an outfit that's at the University of Minnesota, tied in with a number of other, however much we might despair about the craziness in the United States, they still have excellent and well-funded public institutions of kind of research and collaboration. In any case, there's an outfit called CIDRAP at the University of Minnesota, and they put out a piece. It might have been the end of April, so they were still at the time when people were trying to figure out where it was all headed, or what anybody needed to do. But I come to this: their top advice in terms of leadership and communication was, don't be afraid to communicate uncertainty.
Absolutely.
If you're uncertain, then the people should know they are. And that, to me, is whatever else we learn from this pandemic, we already know enough to have learned that lesson. And you can see it in the clear contrast between how the national government in the United States has compared to that of Germany or Canada.
It's so interesting you say that, because, in a very small way, our faculty was tested with that as well. We had to adapt to the pandemic. The university closed for a week in March. And for a couple of days there, we really weren't sure what we were doing. And we were just trying to get our bearings and understand the situation. And then we started hearing from students, and they get on Facebook, and with the sort of instantaneousness of communication, it's like, we're not hearing from the faculty. What are they doing? What's happening? And then what we decided to do is say, okay, well, we don't have answers, but what we have to communicate is that we're working on it. And so, in the communications, and I don't know, I just, maybe it was therapeutic for me, but I just kind of, wrote to students, said, look, this is what we're working on. Like, these are the issues that we've identified. This is what we understand the challenges are. Here are the uncertainties that we're dealing with. We don't have all of the answers, but trust us, we are on this, and we understand the complexity of the circumstance and how uncertain and anxious it's making you feel. Here's a way to communicate with us. And but I think a lot of we felt, and I certainly felt for a couple of days, a little bit paralyzed by that uncertainty. And then when our students kind of kicked us in the rear end, and we're kind of like, well, wait a minute, talk to us. And that was sort of, and then I was a little bit worried about how that would be received, because we didn't have answers. So when you communicate not with with some uncertainty, or ambiguity, I think, leaders worry that that portrays incompetence, or that you're not kind of up to the challenge. And in fact, it was quite the opposite. What happened was, people got engaged and they understood and they were relieved, and the students said, okay, they understand, they're working on it. So I, I have to get that article from you, because it's something that we're learning in the leadership group at the faculty, and I'd like to see more of that, frankly, from institutions, where they say, look, like, this is a complicated issue and we don't have the answer. But the instinct, I think, is, and I don't know what leadership book this comes from, but the instinct is you only communicate when you have solid information and answers. And I don't know, in my very limited experience, I'm not sure that's necessarily the best approach.
And I do think that this is something that we now, there are lots of other things that we still have to sort out, and there are even questions today from microbiology point of view, whether the virus may be mutating or evolving into something else. But we have learned some really important lessons, and lessons that we don't need to see any longer about leadership.
Yeah. Well, Wade, a couple of policy wonks can go on like this all day, but why don't we get to our last segment, which is about advice for law students. So, we've talked a bit about the pandemic, and our students now are going through a pretty uncertain time with jobs, and the changes to the way they're learning. Do you have any advice for our students to give them some hope going forward?
I have two things, Mike. One is universal, and it's certainly been my experience, is the, the central importance of writing, and to always be working to be a better writer. What I love about that point is it takes you to being a better reader, uh, and it uh, and a clearer thinker. And no matter what one is doing in law or as a law student, um, you just can't get around the written word, or you can't touch it. And this is something I learned well during my studies and during those days of wandering the stacks, and I certainly learned it during my time clerking with Esty, and I have since. I still value that, because it's a way in which no matter how accomplished we are or how far we think we've gotten along the path, it takes us right back to uh, there's no substitute for work, and in the case of law, there's no substitute for respecting the written word as the thing that really drives our value, or that makes it worth doing to us professionally. The second thing is more in the realm of time management. I think we've touched on that in a few ways in our discussion today. Um, I always I always told my students that I was teaching, um, and I colleagues around the cabinet table. Um, if you're supposed to be somewhere, show up on time, because it's not just your time; it's everyone else's. It's about respect and it's about getting on to the next thing. And you can, and people do, and I know lots of lawyers do, just create lots of extra stress for themselves, for others, by not respecting that very basic. That basic. Must tell you, this is fun. So Mary Louise Lynch, for whom that nice room in the law school is named, for good reason. She was a long time contributor, way back to being, I think, what was originally called the secretary of law school was in St. John, but I went to visit with Mary Lou during um, that first year that I was dean, and she lived at that point in Ottawa in a nice senior residence. She was she had the resources, and she was a strong woman. Like there was, you didn't have to wait too long to find out what was on her mind. And I was to meet her at 10 in the morning at this Laurier residence, I think, or Rideau residence, whatever it was called. And she was uh, she was waiting in the foyer, and they arrived like 3 minutes ahead of this 10 o'clock. And she threw open the door and said in this very stern voice, what happened, she was great. I really enjoyed her company, but she had this just strong everything. And the first words she spoke to me were, Lord Beaverbrook always admired people who showed up on time.
So, Wade, another challenge that law students are facing these days increasingly is around mental health, managing stress and anxiety. And, as premier and as president of UPI and the other roles that you've had, there are probably a lot of things that would have been cause for stress. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for our students about how not to let stress get the better of you and how to manage those emotions.
I don't know if I have advice that will be, directly applicable for others. But let me mention a few things, Mike. One is I think it's really important to be aware of our physical environment or our surroundings, and that could be, where we're working. Or I'll send you a photo of the view from my place here today, and I don't say that glibly. I think we should, if we can always get some solace or energy or perspective from uh, being alert to what's around. Um, and I certainly have now a great life and support at home. At some level, I probably do want to go back. I was thinking Barack Obama credit for this, but it's more Michelle. Uh, the idea that you just rise above stuff, and I don't mean this in turn away from it, but when she had and they go, we go by. There's someone today that can invite us to go or even preoccupy us in following stuff or paying attention to stuff that we better. I'll give you a good example. Here's an example, and maybe well, last Friday night we were all shocked but not surprised at the turn of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's demise. And within an unconscionable 2 hours, started about her replacement and push that through. And by Sunday, maybe Saturday, I said to myself, I'm not pay any attention to this. It's garbage. I'm going to spend my time reading about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, about her accomplishments, not just accomplishments, but her commitment and her discipline and her brilliance, serious hard work, and unquestionably was a better use of my time
Right.
than worrying which senator is going to come next, or how fast they can kind of disregard any principle that ever existed before and push it through. So in any case, yeah, I think we actually have to take some agency in what we do with our time. Uh, and if we're spending our time on something, distressing us or worrying or uh, causing anxiety, and maybe there's something else we should be doing.
Right, right. I think that's such an interesting example, and such a recent example of how you can make a choice, conscious choice, either to focus on the things that are distressing or focus on the things that are inspiring. Because there are two angles to that, and there's clearly one path that's better, right? So I think there's a really important lesson there. And I guess our last segment here is I like to ask our guests sort of a funny or quirky question. And not all of our audience will have attended the Law 125, and you were the keynote speaker at that gala. And I recall that you told a story about an epic struggle that you had involving the head law librarian and the photocopier revenue. And I just thought that our broader audience might want to hear that story. Can you tell it to us?
Yeah, well, it's mainly a reminder of how bare bones things were at the time. It's also a reminder that the photocopier was still a major part of a legal education. My predecessor, Carl Thor, and I had a conversation in the transition where he said, "There's one thing you must know: the money from the photocopier is yours as dean, not the law librarians." And I think at the time, photocopies were 10 cents a piece. And there was money, maybe a grand total of, I suppose somewhere between 10 and 15 or 16,000 a year. Wouldn't sound like much these days. But in any event, that was the main thing Carl wanted me to know, is that I wasn't to be kind of put around on this.
How did that work out for you? How did that work out?
No, we got the money. Of course, it wasn't long after I was there that the law librarian had her hands on a lot more than 10 or 15,000. What we were able to do with the heritage funds, and rightly so. We were happy to add to the resources of the library. And then, of course, it wasn't long after that the internet kind of really became a reality, a factor, and I think there was less going into the photocopier after that anyway.
Wow. Well, I honestly, as you're telling that story, I'm trying to think where the photocopiers actually are in the library now. And I can't even envision, like I'm sitting in the library, I'm looking out the windows, I don't even know where I would find the photocopier. It's fascinating.
Somewhere not too far from your computer, I expect.
I guess why don't we close with this question? We've covered a lot of ground today, and it's just been a blast for me. Really a treat. Next year, and I don't mean to date you here, but next year is going to be the 40th anniversary of your graduation, 2021. You graduated in 1981, and I'm just wondering, over those 4 decades, what's the most enduring takeaway of your law school experience? You've seen a lot, but what's the thing that stuck with you the most?
There are lots of if this were a long list, they're hard to fill it. But let me say what is at the top of any list is the bonds with contemporaries, with classmates, or at law school at the time, and the sense of connection to professors and to the law school, and the whole what that is as part of your life. But let me this into or just talk about it more than friendships or networking or whatever. things get called these days, that there really is a bond. We've had regular or periodic Zoom get-togethers, friends and people that we've stayed real close over time. So it's that has to be the most enduring thing.
That's wonderful to hear after 40 years. I feel the same way about friends from law school too. It's a special experience. And it sounds to me like, that's a big group that, of it's almost like an extended family, it seems. And we hear that a lot from alumni. Wade, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed it so much. I hope you have too, and I hope our audience enjoys it as well. And I just want to thank you so much for giving us your time and agreeing to do this today.
Well, Mike, it's been a pleasure on my end, starting with our walk on the PEI beach in August, and certainly we valued the chance to talk today. I just want our people who are viewing this to know that we didn't consult in advance on that we would wear the same shirt.
I was wondering if one of us was going to point that out. Yeah, next time we'll have a kind of wardrobe consultation or something, and make sure.
Anyway, good luck with everything you're doing, and I'm really glad to see things happening at UNB Law.
Fantastic. Well, that was our conversation with Wade McLaughlin. Thank you very much for tuning in to the UNB Law podcast, and please join us for an episode coming soon. Thanks, everyone. Take care.